Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining the JS Mindset Weekly Call. My name's Denny. Today is Sunday, August 25th, 2019. We appreciate your patience for a one-day delay. On the call today are the boys, Jim Sinclair, Bill Holter, and Famous Dave from Parts Unknown. Last week is best described as an interruption. The trade dispute with China is entering what I call the alpha male stage, which means that it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. We've got two big-time players squaring off, and it looks like it's going to get ugly and continue to stay ugly. The Federal Reserve Chairman now has its members and employees on a news lockdown, meaning that no one's allowed to talk to the press except the chairman. And last and certainly not least, the markets just appear to be detonating. In all of that, it's always interesting to talk to the boys and get their perspective on these and certainly the other events and circumstances that are taking place daily. Once again this week, we've received a lot of comments and questions from listeners, and we'll do our best to address those as we go along through this next hour or so. Always remember, we're not giving investment advice. We are trying to give you another perspective of the economic world to your own perspective, just so you can be prepared for what might certainly be some very trying times ahead. As always, thanks for investing in the premium side of JS Mindset. There you have access to Bill's writings, which are some of the clearest set of thoughts and perspectives on financial events that are out there. You also get a chance to see Jim's and Dave's posting of things that you just might miss in your own daily slogs through the current events. Dave, going to you first. We just cannot ignore what's going on between China and the United States. I'm not even going to ask you the question. I'm just going to ask you to start talking about the current trade situation between the United States and China. Go for it, Dave.
Well, Denny, Jim, Bill, and myself were from day one of the camp that trade wars aren't going to work, neither are sanctions going to work. We're too far down the road of interconnected economies for that to work, and we thought it would be a foolish way to go. At the same time, we thought that, Donald buying the stock market going up is, his mantra was probably not a good way to go, because sooner or later that comes back to bite you. Well, again, when we're playing this world game, our leaders have to think in a different time frame than, let's say, the president of China, who technically is there for life. Donald's running for his life in the next election in less than a year. So he has to react differently to world affairs than somebody who may not have to worry about that. So where we're at right now is I don't think we're in a good position in the trade war game. The American economy, unfortunately, is starting to show signs of stress, things that we've pointed out for a very long time that were being covered up by mope. And they still are to an extent. But those stresses are being felt throughout different parts of the country now. The auto industry is slowing down. The farming industry isn't doing as well. The trucking industry isn't doing as well. The real estate market isn't doing as well. And if you turn that over to the fact that we're going back to free money, we don't have a lot of bullets left in the chamber to continue to fight this game. So, Jim and Bill, why don't one of you guys pick up from here, too, because we've talked about this for 2 years, and it sure seems to have gone the way we thought it was going to go.
Well, Bill and I had been discussing it over the last few days, and maybe, Bill, you want to tell people what a tariff really is and work them back on that?
Well, it's really a tax.
And the tax is on the guy who starts the tariff.
Right. It's
not a tax on others.
Right. It's a tax on. If we put a tariff on Chinese goods or Indian goods or whatever goods, it means the price goes up, and it means the consumer, ultimately, the people who go to Walmart or wherever, end up paying more for that good, and that ends up the tariff ends up in the Treasury.
So so when they get into a tariff war, you're actually taxing yourself. And we're in a political situation where, Denny, you've been very kind in what you've said of the condition of the U.S. economy. But if we look at what makes up the figures, it's as easy to conclude that we're already in a recession. that Donald's listening to people who can make statistics say anything they want, while they should be listening to Mr. Williams, who has taken the same set of numbers and run them through the 1970 matrix to take a look at the key figures of employment, etc., and they're diametrically opposed to what we're hearing now. That is impossible. If there was truth in what we're hearing now, then there'd be, Mr. Williams went back to his figures, there would be some life of that truth in there. In other words, he might find the economy not growing as fast, but it would be growing. It is impossible that we can announce we have the greatest economy since the beginning of time. And at the same time, the figures that are being put through by Williams says quite to the contrary. You have tremendous inflation. You have bigger unemployment than you're talking about. Your consumer is not as robust as you'd want them to think. So if you add to the fact that every time Don raises the price raises the price of existing tariffs, he's raising taxes on all U.S. citizens. So while he got a lot of kudos for a modest tax reduction, really favoring the rich and killing people on the real estate side, he has only one tool he can use. Fiscal stimulation requires monetary stimulation. If you build a road, somebody wants to get paid for the materials. So if we fiscally stimulate, we have to be quietly sneaking QE all over the place. But the big buyers in QE right now don't want our bonds. And the only reason the dollar is strong and there's any bond selling is it's the only currency that has a number in front of the 0.0. And
Jim,
that's not a good reason for...
Yeah, Jim, Dave, and Bill, here's... not that I'm a defender of Donald Trump, but it appears to me that for 30 years we've had our clocks cleaned by the Chinese. And I think what President Trump is trying to do is he's trying to stand up and at least make some negotiations. And if he doesn't scare the market,
exactly the right thing in that mode, but at the wrong time.
At the wrong time. If he doesn't scare the markets, he's darn well not going to scare the Chinese. So I don't think he cares if he's scaring the markets or us as Americans. But well, I don't think he's got a hand to really negotiate with, Jim.
Well, I would say that now, how do you defend yourself if you're taxing yourself? Okay, you're done now. And you all of a sudden have an epiphany and realize that every time you raise the tariff or put a new tariff on anybody, anywhere, you are taxing your own citizens because of the increased cost of the good.
Well, Jim, that opens the door for tax cuts.
Tax cuts are coming.
Opens the door to the article that I wrote, I think it was it Thursday or Friday, Infinity is Here. Fiscal stimulus is going to require a buyer of the bonds. The buyer of the bonds is only going to be the Fed, and that is monetization.
This is the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end. Okay? Because it's as if we're defending ourselves against enemies. We're running out of ammunition. We might try a big bluff, and people have gotten the Medal of Honor when it worked, but this is serious. And what it means to me, and what I read in Bill's article, is that this almost guarantees that Don will have to use the one weapon he has, cutting taxes. Maybe going back and rolling back that real estate adjustment and letting people deduct the interest as they had historically done, or local taxes deductible. There's only one thing he can use. If I were sitting in his office right now and he said, Jim, you like to live? Then you give me the right answer. Where is my tool? How do I fight what I've done? I said, you raise taxes. What can you do but lower taxes? You have no other. Fed's out, totally out. Fiscal monetary stimulation, it is put into actual freeze frame. This is so historic and could be the end, to some degree, of the Federal Reserve System. They may become service organizations more so than screwing around with the interest rates, because clearly they do not make interest rates. And that is socialism for the rich. For us who believe in freedom, we want free markets and the rule of law, neither of which we have. That was a long answer, but I hope it answered your question.
I'm going to let you keep talking, Jim, because I read this piece by Dave Sheckman, who wrote a couple weeks ago that it just seemed like the perfect storm has arrived, not just with the Chinese and United States negotiations, but what's taking on in Europe and the cabal and the gold market.
How about Brazil's rainforest on fire?
You know, they do that every year.
30,000 square miles, and that thing is up in smoke.
Jim, they've been doing that every year, and I think Macron just wanted to gain some attention. Yeah, but be that as it may, what I think David was saying is that the cabal is losing its power daily, but he really didn't indicate a prediction or a forecast for how much longer the cabal could even launch a fight. And he didn't even proffer
their tool is negative mope. Turn on MSM now, and all you hear about is recession.
Yeah, but they're always shorting the market. At what point will that just not work anymore?
Shorting the market will work, but in a volatile environment, there is no market. There are only computers. There is no fundamentals. There's only momentum. And that's when the sharks start eating the sharks, because the money that's free to do this is the money that's been gained by high-frequency trading, algorithms, quants, etc. And now they're eating each other because they've destroyed retail. Retail does not exist. A broker starves to death now because the phone never rings. So this is that phase when the eventual attack is on the dollar. And everything, all currencies are going lower, including the dollar. But how that appears on the USDX simply depends on which is declining faster that day. So we are not predicting things that will happen. We're not standing on a street corner and saying that make a donation before the world ends. It's over. In terms of the financial world, we've been used to. I think it will bring a full 360 degrees in two turns. And I think we're going back to economic law. And I can only hope that a man of integrity, if there are any other than the present president, are there, sustain rule of law in the country, because you're about to re-enter real markets. Therefore, you're about to enter the rule of free markets.
Hey, Bill.
Fat shark is eating a fat shark. Then there's only one fat shark left, and he starves to death.
We saw something this week, Bill, when we talk about markets.
The that is when someone fails to deliver metal, that's when the cabal's done.
Yes, absolutely. Correct.
That's the answer.
If you want a trigger, there's a trigger. Panic is also a trigger, but it would be with that.
That'll create a panic.
It would. Failure to deliver any huge leverage item on anything, anywhere, in any exchange. And it's over.
Bill, the investigative analysis has begun. Some might call it forensic analysis, and it's been done on General Electric's balance sheet and financial reporting. I've heard comments about suspected fraud, proving fraud, and that can only mean that more focus is going to be applied to GE. What was once one of our greatest companies is being exposed in a very negative way. What will that do for confidence in markets?
Well, I mean, it'll destroy confidence, but this has been going on for years and years. This has been going on since the 80s with Jack Welch. I mean, GE never missed a quarter. They were never light on revenues, never light on profits. I mean, they engineered their financial statements. And this guy, Henry Markopoulos, who dug up the dirt on Madoff, I would stake my life that what he's saying is correct, because he's a digger. He's been absolutely correct in the past, and he's absolutely adamant.
Well, I know it for a fact, Bill. One of my key employees has worked for me for 19 years, left General Electric and was at that time in charge of the real estate division evaluations. And although she's never told me the absolute fact, she told me that she left because she refused to sign off on the tax returns. They were the largest over-the-counter derivative dealer in the world for a few years. Those things, those legacy pieces of junk they created, are strangling them to death.
They don't go away.
There's no way to fix it. They're gone. And add Deutsche Bank to that list.
David, facial recognition software is really starting to spook the freedom-loving and privacy-loving people across the world. Even in my own local airport here, which is no small airport, when I walk from the garage into the gates, there are several cameras, and I know they're taking my picture. Our faces are part of a database now, and the fear is that just as what's been done in China, if your face is seen in the wrong places and associating with the wrong people, Lord help me if they find me with you three, you could be shut off. You could be shut off from everything, from plane travel to public events. Dave, any way you look at it, governments have got to be working up their game plans to control citizens, even right now in the near future.
Oh, they absolutely are. They've been doing this a long time. And again, I was called the conspiracy theory, again, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I said every phone was tapped, every conversation was listened to, people literally ridiculed me, and Bill will attest to it. And then it became public knowledge, and everybody went to I have nothing to hide. I was talking about facial recognition software years and years and years before this all became to the forefront, and everybody was like, well. Facebook is the largest facial recognition program on the planet, and over 2 billion people willingly post not only their pictures, but their family members, their cats, and their dogs. The public always comes to the end result way too late. And it's way too late. There's nothing we could do about facial recognition. They're rolling it out. Unless you want to put your head in a bag and walk around, and even then they'll probably be able to see through it sooner or later. You're going to have to
put a fly mask on my horse.
Right. Well, again, to answer a listener's questions from last week, asking me, well, what are the solutions? Well, the solutions are, do you have a second citizenship? Do you have a second country you may be able to go to? Are you banking outside of the United States? Are you prepared to get up and leave where you are when things become uncomfortable? And if you're not, well, then you probably have not prepared. Now, if you can't financially prepare to do that, I can't help you with that one. But there are a lot of steps people could take. I have had a lot of people say to me, I am and my wife is ready to get up and go, but my kids are a problem. Well, that's a Rubicon that you have to cross as an individual. I specifically would love to have dogs. I'm a dog lover. The problem is I don't want to own anything with me that I do not want to leave behind tomorrow. And unfortunately, that's where a pet would come into. Other than a goldfish, I don't want anything because I do want to keep my situation fluid. Because as we're sitting here talking, we all don't know exactly how this unfolds. Because again, a listener wrote in, well, what is after the reset? For all we know, it could look like Hong Kong. We really don't know, which is why you have to cover all types of avenues and figure out for yourself mentally what you are and are not prepared to do. Because facial recognition is here. We live in a police state. Anybody who doesn't believe me, I could post 30 articles, go back to Waco, Texas, to any of the ones you want to pick. We live in a full-on police state. There's cameras everywhere here. There's facial recognition in every airport. They could pull you off the bus, pull you off the train, pull you off the jet. So it's here. I don't have an answer to this one because Big Brother and AI have now become super scary. Move to the woods and live what's left of your life out.
David,
and to that,
we don't have the answers, but what we're trying to tell, or what we're urging people to do is, if you have the means, create options now.
Be prepared by creating options.
Exactly.
Whatever the option is, it fits you.
Jim, we've heard for weeks about inverted yield curves, the analysis of the 10-year versus the 2-year, blah, blah, blah. And virtually every comparison are constantly being talked about. However, this week I saw that the 30-year treasuries are now below the Fed's funds rate. Clearly the numbers are just not good, Jim.
Well, the first thing is, are the numbers good or aren't they? That's what you point out. The second is that we had a wild market recently, a misinterpretation, a calming down, a move away from protection, or what people think is protection. Then instantaneously we found out that the Chinese had retaliated, and everything went the other way. So what you're looking at in the yield curve is like money in a zero gravity storm, because once you get into giving your money to another to be paid back less than the face value of the instrument you did, in other words, less money, that's a trap. A trap that it is extraordinarily difficult to get out of. A trap which doesn't have that much economic history upon which you can study. A trap that I don't think even was considered possible by the great old deeds. Did Ricardo write about it, or Smith, or Adams, or any of the great economists that designed and determined modern economics? No, because nobody ever thought that if that was to happen, it could persist. Well, it will self-persist, and we've already seen that. There are a lot to do with the cost of money and the political power in every country. So what is the next war? How deep does the curve go in reverse? And once the rush to the dollar it finishes, which it will when the dollar's paying almost nothing or nothing, then the curve is going to start impacting the ability for business to finance, which is what it does, and will bring on a significant and prolonged business slowdown. Especially, I think it's a key that if our president, who I admire as well, taxes German automobiles, then we're in a global tariff war. And remember, a tariff is a tax, and the only way you can fight it is to reduce taxation. Think about all of that in terms of what it would do for our country, our currency, the dollar.
So,
Denny,
go ahead,
let me add to that.
No.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the 30-year bond is trading below the Fed funds rate. You've got negative rates all over the place, and the most negative rates are the longer-term securities. What I want to say is what is perceived as the greatest safe havens on the planet today, and I'm excluding gold and silver because even they are safe, they are the ultimate safe havens, but what the perception is that long-term credit instruments and credit instruments in general are the ultimate safe havens. More money is going to be lost in those than in anything in the history of the world.
Well, I think the Chinese are ahead on that, Bill, because I am aware that the Chinese are negotiating contracts for their Belt and Road Initiative for payment from their holdings of the treasuries. They've got, $1.1 trillion in treasuries. As always, the Chinese are ahead of the game then?
Right. Well, I mean, that's an automatic lowering or flushing or whatever you want to call it of their treasury holdings. It's a way to leak them out and get something real in return.
Bill, back in the 1980s.
Fiscal stimulation is totally impossible, Bill, by what you have just said. It can't, because who's going to buy our bonds?
Only the central
Russia,
banks.
China, or ourselves, via Grand Cayman, Belgium, and elsewhere.
Jim, the bond dealers are absolutely loaded up with treasuries. I'd hate to be a bond dealer. J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and Citigroup make up 25% of the budget deficit in their purchases of treasuries. But where in the world are those treasuries going to end up? Nobody's going to buy them.
Back to the Treasury.
Back to the Treasury, which is monetization.
That is the ultimate, and in some cases, automatic event when the primary dealer gets overloaded.
The primary dealers, they've gotten. Can you imagine how frustrated those guys must be?
I think they ought to go in the gold coin business. I'd be happy.
They're not frustrated yet because interest rates are not rising. But once interest rates do begin to rise, then they're going to be frustrated and bankrupt.
All right, Bill. I always look at demographics. Back in the 1980s, there was a young man that I got a chance to meet with and talk for the better part of 6 hours. His name was Harry Dent. And in those early years of his writings, his books, his speeches, they helped us non-economic types to figure out where resources were going to be utilized. Now, years later, I gave up on his writings because he went wacko banano on gold and silver, and he was totally off base. But his demographic logic that he started really is important. We've got the millennials, Bill, and these are the guys and gals that are born between 81 and 96, and they're loaded up with debt. They're struggling to find new jobs, and they're clearly not recognized as any economic driver at all. But this week I read from somebody that said wise people are going to start, the wise people are saying that the millennials are going to save the stock market. What do you think?
Wise people?
Yeah. These are people who have a reputation for wisdom.
Well,
I'm not going to name their names because I'd be embarrassed to have my name on that list.
I don't even know how to respond to that. That's like...
There is no market, Bill.
It's like
there's
saying,
a computer with blinking lights in cyberspace.
Yeah, I mean, that's absurd. It's like saying the homeless are going to run the country and everything will be fine.
Okay, now since you bring up the homeless, David, did you catch it that California is blaming their homeless population on Texas? Because Texas doesn't have the support groups for homeless and all the social programs. So everybody from Texas who's homeless is supposedly going to California, and the California government or governor calls out Texas as being the source of his problem in California. This is crazy time.
Well, what's happening is what we've talked about is going to happen for years. And rather than admit that mistakes have been made and let's attempt to fix the mistakes, it's blame the other guy. It's the same thing we're doing in our country. The mistake, we talk about mistakes have been made, and China robbed our jobs, and they're stealing this. And nobody, and I've said this before, nobody forced our corporations to go overseas. They did it for a competitive advantage so that they could increase their margins. Car manufacturers moved to Mexico because NAFTA opened the door for manufacturing to move to a lower labor cost market. So when people say, well, they stole our jobs, they didn't steal our jobs. Our government allowed our corporations, because we had the ability to tax them differently on their overseas money that was being made. We chose not to do that because they have much stronger lobbyists than the three of us here.
And the pay scale is different, David.
Well, the pay scale now is heavily skewed to the executives walking away with bundles and bundles of money.
No, what I'm saying is the pay scale, for instance, I wear Wrangler jeans, and Wranglers and Levi's were produced for a long, long time in Costa Rica. And the average daily pay in Costa Rica, and I'm not up to date, I'm probably 6-7 years behind, but it was about $14 a day versus workers here who are probably making $10 or $12 an hour. So that's the big reason that business went overseas, was because their cost to produce was so much less.
Well,
what's done is done and can't be undone.
Correct.
And believe it or not, they don't even make jeans in Costa Rica because $14, $15 a day is too much.
Right. I'm aware of this, and that's the point I'm trying to get at. No one stole our jobs. Our corporations took the jobs overseas. Congress allowed it to happen, and the tax code could have been adjusted to solve
Yes.
this problem all along. Correct?
Yes.
And then the tax would have ultimately been paid by Nike or whoever was employing overseas employees. These over there.
The best you can hope for is reset, rebuild.
Well, correct. And we never know what the reset's going to look like, because if we go to civil unrest, all bets are off, and no matter what any of us prepared for, we're going to be all really uncomfortable, is a good way to put it.
You guys have been...
Hong Kong Bridge is a good example of what will happen to the millenniums, and going all the way back to every name they've had for people with alternative ideas. They're worried that China's legal arm will all of a sudden reach and cover Hong Kong. They're out by the millions. What do you think will happen when what we're discussing, and is happening right now in terms of the points of discussion, become understood at a time when MSM has a plan to get rid of Trump through negative mope? You can't turn on one station they have now, and you don't hear new markets. You don't new highs. You don't hear that the people from Azerbaijan have more jobs than they've ever had in the United States. What you hear is everything's slowing down around in Europe and will affect the U.S. economy.
You guys have absolutely nailed the movement of production based on the cost of goods sold. What I thought was interesting is that now that welfare policies are changing where people will live, and we can only guess what the migration will be. If California is pissed that Texas isn't as much of a welfare state as they are, I got a feeling this is the way it's going to be in the future. And whether you're a sanctuary city or what, all of a sudden, for the non-producers or those who are unable to produce, they're going to go to the place where they get better welfare benefits or better social benefits. I just thought it was interesting that one state was calling out another for not being so liberal.
That's like a tariff war, because they'll pull the plug. Okay, the social net that's out there has nowhere to go to handle the amount of people falling into it daily.
Yeah. Bill,
the Pension Guarantee Corporation doesn't have enough money to guarantee one pension plan.
Less than 3%. Less than 3% coverage, Jim.
This is what's out there, and it is now happening. Not tomorrow, not a month from today, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 5 years. This is what's happening. So we've enjoyed a wonderful life. I lived and played in the 1950s when things were simple, and I've survived very nicely through the move to complexity. But if you expect a return of any part of that pleasantry, bear in mind you must have rule of law and free markets. Forgive my sin, not capitalism.
You know, we got a call this week, or we got a question this week from an 80-year-old Air Force vet. He's a retired master sergeant and a Vietnam vet. And he made this observation, and we need to talk about it since we're talking about the rule of law. And he said, well, when the stuff hits the fan, and being a master sergeant, he used a different word, but when the stuff hits the fan, why would our government and all the other governments not nationalize any and all productive, precious metal mines within their borders? And further, why would our governments not confiscate all of our shiny stuff and make it a crime to transact in the metals, or even just tax the snot out of it?
They will. Okay.
So how do we protect our... Okay, so what the Master Sergeant wants to know is how do we protect ourselves from that one, Jim?
Well, I've already nationalized my investment 9 years ago. And believe it or not, they have just woken up to the fact that the deal I have gives them 45% of the underlying asset. And now I have the Army, the police. I have support from everywhere. I probably have better support from the government than any other company in that area or on that continent, because I realize that I erase colonialism 9 years ago. The answer is we're going into a new world with new rules, new leaders. We're not going to come back to the America that I love so much. And financially, you have to follow the profit. I don't mean a profit like ET. I mean profit like IT, money. And that is without any doubt begins on the part of the Silk Road in which relative rationality still exists. The Middle East is a write-off, and that's going to be quite destabilizing. China and Russia, he who has the gold makes the rules. Gold will move into free gold, away from paper gold. And gold's tie to currencies is going to be entirely different than what anybody thinks. But it will be tied by a Gordian knot. And, it's just, we're headed for a different world. The 1950s was something, sit back and think about it. I mean, it was so simple and so much fun. And I can remember Barbara with her poodle skirt and the whole 9 yards. Now we've got nothing but complexity and debauchery and untruth and mind manipulation. And I can't give you any listener medicine for that, except to know it exists. And you're either gonna stay in place, or you're gonna move somewhere. And there are two types of thinking and two types of preparation you have to do. We've written everything there is to know about preparation in many series of articles. Bill and I, it's on mindset, and it's something that I don't think people have the ability to concentrate on, and it's certainly not the snowflakes or millenniums or whatever they call it. They're clueless. But this is hiding right in front of your eyes. You don't have to be a great economist to understand that what is taking place today has the ability to continue. And where the economies are the strongest and where the currencies can be the strongest lies where prosperity will be. And we're headed into a situation in which this country will be very much like the industrial nations that haven't done so well. And,
let's talk about that just a second. Bill? Yes, sir?
Let's go back to the reader's question. That's why you diversify your locations of where your physical metal is held. You don't have it all buried in, under your foundation. You don't have it all in the U.S. You don't have it all in Canada. You don't have it all in Switzerland. You don't have it all in Singapore. You have it in several different places. That's the first thing. The second thing is that's why you diversify geographically with different mining entities. Because, there's going to be some losers. And I would also add that, governments can blacklist gold, they can blacklist silver, but black markets will arise and they will exist.
And they're huge, and they've always been huge.
Yes, exactly.
And one of the reasons why my interest lies in Africa is because another criteria I might add to that is that the general populace doesn't hold the skill set to operate a mine. And man, let me tell you, it is just putting a shovel in the ground. It is complex beyond your wildest dream. And so the reason why no nationalized gold mine ever made money is because when it was nationalized, the people who ran it stole whatever gold they had, and there was no ability to create new gold.
Venezuela is the example of that, Jim.
Yeah.
Look at their oil.
And so nationalization has a very poor history. But what doesn't have a poor history is the arrangement that I've made whereby I will be running an operation for the government in which they make $1, I make $1. And eventually, if that asset is sold, because they own a part of the underlying asset, which they don't in every other deal in the world, they have a lot to gain and a lot to incentivize them to sell. And my biggest problem is I'm usually ahead of the curve, and so I've had to wait many years. But then I'm an elephant hunter.
Too much time.
No, you're right too soon. You are right, but you're right too soon. But you have to be right too soon to be where you are. So it's a trick bag.
And then forget hunting mice, hunt elephants. If it doesn't have the capability of being an elephant, don't walk away, run.
Let's jump back to the government.
And then defend that asset with everything you know, in every way possible. Because you can bet when you get a big asset, you also get big people want to take it away from you.
Bill, at some point, I believe the government, our government, governments across the world, especially the United States, they're all going to be going through a bankruptcy process. Now, what's that going to look like if the country's debt, which is obviously somebody else's asset, all of a sudden is gone? How can we pull off a bankruptcy and still keep the ship above water?
Well, you don't keep the ship above water. For a time, the ship is underwater, and there's a lot of deaths involved, financial deaths and outright deaths just from starvation, lack of medication, you name it. Jim has always said, in order to get things on the right track, you have to burn the system down and then rebuild it. And the assets of the failed, the owners of that have assets of the failed entity, they're going to lose. There have to be losers.
Well, okay, then if the Federal Reserve is the one that buys all of the United States debt, and we go from what was $800 billion a few years ago to 10, 20 trillion, then the bankruptcy will destroy the Federal Reserve.
That's correct.
Fair?
But it will also,
it may have already happened in terms of public confidence. This fight between a president and a recently elected chairman who he lauded as being, the second coming, is extraordinarily embarrassing. And bear in mind, central banks have cooperated, such as the Swiss National Bank, in buying most of the hot stocks. What are they thinking about the hot stocks today?
But, Jim, it's not just the central banks. I mean, government bonds are the foundation to everything today. They're the foundation to banks. They're the foundation to insurance companies. Think about insurance companies. The way they work is they take premiums in and invest them in bonds at, pick a number, 5%, 7%, 8%, 9%, and that's how they make their profit. How are they profitable with negative rates? And what happens when it turns out that what they have virtually all of their assets in becomes worthless?
Well, they turn into medical insurance companies by trying to maintain their life by increasing the cost of insurance to maintain a profit level when there's no return on anything else, and then any rescues. What you're talking about is the seeds of hyperinflation.
Right, a monetary
that no longer sit in the ground waiting to germinate. They've popped. They're out. The sun's on them. They're growing.
I heard an argument about diversification this week that I really did not know how to respond to the person without calling them ignorant. And it said in a bankruptcy, here's the argument they were making, that in a bankruptcy, if you're Chrysler bondholder during an Obama presidency, of course it doesn't work that way, but if you're a bondholder, bonds are clearly settled earlier with the bondholders than the general liabilities of the corporation. I think the only thing ahead of them are taxes and employee wages. But the guy that was telling me this was saying that's why he's going to be a bond investor. And all I said was, son, it's not going to be too long before the Federal Reserve is buying corporate bonds. But that's the argument I'm hearing about. Instead of holding stocks or instead of holding gold or silver or real estate, they think that that even in a bankruptcy, they're going to be the first pig to the trough. Any comments from any of you?
Well, goodbye, millennials.
Yeah.
The problem is that the bonds are denominated in a currency. And this is not just a credit event. The currency itself is held up by credit. So when credit collapses, so does the currency. It's like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a box that closes in on itself and all of a sudden is gone. I mean, yeah, he's the first pig to the trough. But
is there anything there?
Well, what's in the trough? It's poison. It's nothing. It's empty.
And the tool to refill it doesn't exist.
Right.
In a manner which would not create hyperinflation.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, what Jim's saying is hyperinflation. So let's just say I give you $1,000 and you guarantee to give me back $998 10 years from now in my negative yielding bond. Well, in 10 years, I'm going to give you $998 back. But that $998 isn't going to buy you a loaf of bread. So technically the bond didn't default, did it? The currency
No. That's what I'm saying. People are not stupid.
They're just a currency event, David.
They're just ignorant of where this is going. Right. David, I got a listener
what would be your reaction to owning a dilapidated farm in the boonies above the 45th parallel in the Northeast with a hell of a nice motorhome hidden inside the barn? Gold underneath the tires and in various places around the world, as Bill has already recommended on this call.
That sounds like a pretty good plan.
I like it because it can move.
Yeah.
I like it because the place I've decided to put it, I could paddle a canoe to Canada. Okay, but I can drive there too. And I'm not in a major area where they got major border crossings. I'm on a little old crickety bridge with a 90-year-old border guard.
We've got a lot of listeners from Canada, and I think that they may be leaving Canada, and I don't know where they're going to go. Are they coming down here, and we're going up there just to trade places?
No, they're better off where they are. Yeah. They just go north in Canada to not be bothered by people.
David, you read about as much as anybody, and I don't know if you saw Jim Rogers' piece this week, but he was actually counseling people to wait to buy precious metals. He's in favor of precious metals, but his argument was that don't get into them until the rush back into the dollar is complete, and that would make the precious metals cheaper. And his thought is that in a currency crisis, the panic is going to drive investors into the U.S. dollar as the tallest of the pygmies, and that gold and silver would be much lower. Now, this is truly different than what many of us are thinking right now. How does he time this?
He was saying that at $1,200 gold, too.
And also, it's not entirely different than what we're saying and thinking right now. Not where the price of gold is concerned, but the function and relevancy of currencies in this race to the bottom will stop controlling what it has normally up to now controlled. I can make an argument for dollar firm and gold through the roof.
David, you got anything to add to that? Yeah. I'm very familiar with the article. I'm very familiar with Jim, and he's a very bright guy. If I knew 1/10 of what he knows, I'd be a genius. But that doesn't mean he's always right. Nor does it mean he's always telling you. Everybody talks their book, and to say right now isn't the time to buy gold, as Bill pointed out, he's been saying that since $1,000. Am I correct, Bill?
Yes.
So we're at $1,525. So we're already, for the average investor, a third in the hole. Meaning we were at 1,000, we're now 1,500. 0 was the bottom. So if you look at this as overall, especially if you're a trader, if you're a trader, you left $500 on the table. if you were just even a half decent trader who went long at $1,000 when Jim told you it was the bottom, and you got to 1,500, that would be a pretty good win for me. Would it? How about you guys?
I'd like that.
And it's only a start.
Yeah, and the bottom line is, Jim, you coined it perfectly. The time to buy gold and silver is whenever you have fiat money that you can exchange into gold or silver.
Just like putting in the savings account.
Yes.
I think it's interesting that you talk that everybody buys or talks their book. I remember I had a buddy who played bridge with Warren Buffett in Omaha, and it was back when he was punching Coke, or I can't remember, whatever, Coca-Cola. And I remember him saying, you be careful what you hear from Warren Buffett. He says, Warren Buffett only tells you what he wants you to know for his book. And those were his words exactly, David.
Well, and again, that's just how life works. If you're a street smart person, you have to think that the person who's out there saying things, either he's a saint, and I don't know how many of those are out there, or these big guys have to talk their book. And, so you always have to, as we talked about when we get emails, you never know who that email's really coming from. It could be Mary Jo Kopechne, who's at the bottom of the river because Teddy put her in there.
Oh, David. All right, Jim, you were the king of the gold in 1980s. I read John Williams of Shadow Stats, Shadow Government Statistics. He calculated the price of gold to be right now $16,454. And when you do the math, it's pretty close to the equivalent of the $850 when you topped out and moved on back in the 1980s. Now, there are predictions now that we're going to be returning to the gold standard by 2020. Jim, if that's a year away, is it possible for us to be back on the gold standard in less than 18 months?
No. To go back on the gold standard at present levels, or even, let's say, 3,000 to 5,000, is too restrictive to trade. The beauty of gold is price can, of course, overcome that. Gold is going to be freed from the fall of its present paper counterfeiting, and will be tied to currency the same way I said before. Millennium walks into a room, everybody turns around because she's drop dead beautiful, and then comes in this lady that isn't quite the same, but she's wearing the Hope Diamond. Everybody stops looking at millennium; they start looking at it as the Hope Diamond. That's how gold will function. The country with the most gold will say we are the best run economy because our reserve is the strongest reserve there is. There is no other reserve other than what we have, and they'll find their currencies in demand because of that. But
somebody asked me,
but a convertible gold system, not a chance. Because why? Anything you make convertible, what happens to it? It gets converted. There goes the system.
I've only got a couple.
At this price, it simply isn't enough gold to support.
So it's going to have to be in the 50,000, 60,000. I think Bill calculated the 70,000 range for it to work.
It has to be at whatever price is required to balance the balance sheets, this time not of the United States, but of all the nations that joined in on the march to globalism.
I want to have some fun at your expense, guys. I have a friend who listens to these calls, and he asked me what the three of you were like. And so this was my description. My description of Bill was Yosemite Sam. And the guy says, that's the way he comes across. I said, don't cross him. I said, he will be one wacky wabbit. And then he asked me about Jim, of course. And I said, well, Jim is like Gandalf the Great from The Hobbit, I said, he's wise beyond measure. He will protect those he loves. And he's got a lot of tricks up his sleeves. And they said, well, what about Dave? And I said, Dave's the big mystery. Dave is the phantom. Nobody sees him, but he's out there doing the good work of the world. So how'd I do? Yosemite Sam, Gandalf the Great, and the Phantom. Did I come close?
I would just
most people call me Smiley.
Smiley.
Very shortly, I hope that nickname changes to Hawkeye.
All right. Now, and then, Bill, what did you say?
I was just going to add on David, if you're going to be in a bar fight, you want him at your side.
Well,
all right,
guys. And again, every week we're just, we're trying to give people, like you said, a different view on things, because as I've sent you some stuff, Denny, over the years, I think you realize why I think the way I do. I didn't just wake up one day and come to the conclusion that, this is how it is. I have spent a lot of time, and I have an enormous amount of research into how this whole chessboard does come together. And I don't claim to be a genius. I just try to get other people to look at it from a non-American standpoint. It's not because I'm not a patriotic person. Patriotism is a refuge of fools. You need to pay attention to your surroundings. And if things are taking place that don't seem right, then you need to stay focused on them and try to find what we think are ways that may protect you if we're correct. And if we end up in a reset condition and there's civil unrest, there is no 100% answer for everybody. What we're trying to do is teach people how to fish for themselves. So I hope that's, helpful information for people.
Yeah, I have one more question for the three of you, and I sort of have to set it up, so forgive me, but I came across the unfunded liabilities calculations for pensions and health care and social programs, and they're literally going through the roof, both on a state level and a national level. They're almost exponential. And at the same time, the bond auctions are just not getting the bids. I'd hate to be a bond dealer. Those bonds are used to fund these pensions, health cares, and social programs. So nobody's buying our bonds except major banks and then ultimately the Federal Reserve. But now the Federal Reserve is backed into a corner, and then in addition to purchasing the majority of the U.S. Treasuries, are they not also going to have to start purchasing corporate bonds and even state bonds and maybe even bigger industry players like Boeing or GE just to keep all the balls in the air? If that's the case, is there anything else but gold, and doesn't gold have to jump pretty quickly here?
Get to a place where you're physically comfortable, or stay or harbor in where you are now. Let these things develop so you can judge the implications of them as they develop, and be prepared to and have enough preparation that wherever you are, you can stay for a while and watch without significant difficulty. Don't pine for what was. Prepare for what is.
The answer to your question, Denny, is yes, and no, there is nothing other than gold.
Well, David, do you have anything else for us this week? And to all the listeners, thanks again for giving us an extra day. We had a lot of scheduling conflicts, and we appreciate your patience. But, Dave, have you got anything for us?
Nope, Denny, we can wrap this up whenever you guys are through.
Bill?
Yeah, I just had one more thing about David. Doesn't look like him, but he's like my cousin Vinny. He's got a nose for bullshit.
Okay. And Jim, the great white father?
You've seen David. I haven't, so I'm not so sure about he doesn't look like your Uncle Vinny.
Jim, have you got anything else for us before we turn you loose?
Very simple. It's not something that's coming, okay? It's here. It's now. It's real. It's solid. It isn't stopping. It's international. It has spread the globe. Please prepare for a modest period of taking care of yourself as if you lived in a floodplain in Texas and it was raining like mad. Okay? Just compare the two. The storm is here. And after the storm, you rebuild what's rebuildable. You walk from what isn't. And you look around and say, where's the best area for myself and my family? Maybe you should do that ahead of time. That's it.
Well said. And with that, listeners, we'll let you go. Always remember that you can pick up these recordings at JS Mindset. There are also the legacy calls, and all that legacy information is there on the main site, on the home site. And there's a search button there. You can find just about anything that's been written for the last several years. With that, thanks for listening. We hope you have a good week.